Hi, I'm Kari Auringer. I'm the winemaker for Cornerstone Cellars. Today we're actually in the cellar. We are finishing up our blends for bottling. We're going to be bottling next week, at the end of next week. We are working on our 2020 Sauvignon Blanc and the 2019 Reds. We're getting ready to bottle everything up at the end of July. So what I've done today is I've pulled samples from the blends that we've done so far, and we've done a tasting where we're going to just see if there's any tweaking that still needs to be done. Move a barrel here, put a barrel there. We have a little room still to play before we get these finished up. So I thought it'd be fun to kind of taste through all of them and see where we are. Right now it's been a really interesting morning. We have tasted a lot of Cabernet. My teeth are a little dark, I know, but that is the way it goes. So what I've got is the 2020 vintage of our Sauvignon Blanc, and this is from the Farina Vineyard. And this is a beautiful vineyard on Sonoma Mountain. And some of you may have seen some of the other visits that I've made there if you go to our YouTube channel. And it's a really great vineyard. It's not at high elevation. We are on Sonoma Mountain, but we're probably only about 300 or 400 feet in elevation. But it's beautiful rocky soil, and it's well drained, perfect temperatures. It gets just that warm enough where Sauvignon Blanc just really thrives. And this vineyard in particular, the Farina Vineyard, is known for Sauvignon Blanc. There is both the Clone 1 Sauvignon Blanc growing there and a little bit of the Muscat clone as well. Both lovely, lovely grapes. It's meticulously farmed. We were just out there this week, and it's coming along really beautifully. It is affected by the drought, as most vineyards are in Northern California. We've seen probably less fruit that's going to come in off that vineyard, and along with the same with other vineyards as well. The vines struggle when they don't have as much water over the winter, which they haven't now for a couple of years. And while we irrigate, that doesn't make up for what the impact of the drought. So we are taking good care of the vineyards. They do look like they're in pretty good shape. We are going to have a smaller yield from them this vintage. And on the plus side of that is what happens is the berries, the clusters, they compensate. So we get smaller berries, so they're not as juicy and not as plump, but that actually works in our favor for the red wines because you end up with more concentration. So your juice to skin ratio changes. And so that gives us a little more concentrated fruit flavor and a lot more aromatics, which is that all comes from the skin. So it does work in our favor in the short term. In the long term, you know, we do have to keep in mind that there could be other years of drought coming. In the meantime, we'll take a look at our 2019, which I am very, very happy with. But let's start with the Sauvignon Blanc, actually. And I've got here is that this is the 2020 Sauvignon Blanc, and this has got beautiful aromatics. It's crisp, but there's this rich tropical note to it. There's melons and peaches. Oh, it just smells so lush. There's a tiny, tiny little bit of vanilla. This wine, I fermented this in concrete egg, which holds about 240 gallons, about 4 barrels worth of wine. There's also new acacia wood barrels being used, and then there's a little bit of neutral French oak, and then I've also got some stainless steel that I fermented. And so the spot, as I mentioned earlier, Farina Vineyard, it gets plenty of sunshine and warmth, and the fruit gets very ripe. We get to pick it when we are ready to pick it. Mother Nature doesn't really have much of a say in that. We pick early in the season. This will usually come in at the very end of August or towards the beginning of September. So let me give that a sip. As the nose indicates, there's a nice lushness to it. There's some tropical fruit flavors. There's some beautiful citrus in there. There's like a little lemon curd in there. But there's a minerality like wet rocks, like with water in a stream is rushing over rocks. And that comes from the concrete egg, I think. It seems that minerality comes from that portion of the blend. And I do keep those pieces separate. I keep the wine and the egg separate from the wine in the acacia barrels and the wine in the stainless steel. And so they really do get combined towards the very end of aging and right before bottling. So this wine now has been blended, and we were able to really use almost every drop that we made this year. the ratio, the blend turned out just beautiful. And so we've got about 50% of this came from concrete egg, and then the other percentage is a little bit of new acacia wood, a neutral acacia wood barrel, and then a neutral French oak barrel, and a little bit of stainless steel. And the other thing I do when with the Sauvignon Blanc is I keep it on the lees. As the fermentation finishes, the yeast cells die off, they drop to the bottom. And instead of racking that clear wine off of those lees, I leave the lees in the container and I stir them up. And that gives a creaminess and a body to the wine that's really beautiful. So you get this bright, crisp acidity, but then there's this lushness of the tropical fruit and this body. There's a little bit of weight to it, a little bit of viscosity. So it's really beautiful balanced wine. But bright, crisp acidity, while it will pair beautifully with food, I don't think it needs it. It's be perfectly happy to be opened up before a dinner or just sitting out on the patio on a warm sunny afternoon. So I can't wait to put this in the bottle. This is right where we want it. This is right what we're trying to capture, all that bright fruit, bright acidity, and the lushness that I can't wait to get in the bottle and have you be able to try. So that's the 2020 Sauvignon Blanc. So then we've got the red wines, and there are one of our main sources for fruit is Oakville Station in the heart of Oakville. It's owned and farmed by the University of California, Davis. The students are out there pretty frequently in the vineyards, and they're measuring and weighing and taking notes and doing experiments and measuring crop load and moisture in the leaves. It's probably one of the most highly researched vineyards in the world. And we are lucky enough to have a long-term relationship with them. We've been sourcing fruit from them for over 12 years. So the first wine that I have here is the Cabernet Franc. So we do get Cabernet Franc, we get Merlot, and we get Cabernet Sauvignon from the Oakville Station. And this butts right up against the Tokelon Vineyard in Oakville. So that's a pretty nice little neighbor to have for sure. So this is the Cab Franc. And this got it blended in just a little tiny bit, a small percentage of Merlot, also from the Oakville Station, and a little bit of Cabernet Sauvignon. And that varies every year. There usually ends up being a little bit of this or that, blended back and forth. And this year, the Cabernet Franc just stands so proudly on its own. There really wasn't a need for a lot of Merlot, which brings this lushness and juiciness. And the Cabernet, which brings that nice structure and backbone and acidity. But this is almost 100% Cabernet Franc. There's nice floral aromas, but the aromas are also, they're lush and they're blackberry and they're kind of large and effusive. But then on the entry, it's soft and lush. So there's this beautiful high expectation for all this power, but then when it hits the palate, it's soft and it's round and it just kind of rolls around. And there's a little bit of chocolate in there, like a little bit of cocoa, just a hint. And then it's got the backbone that you expect from a young wine. It's got a little bit of tan, a little bit of acidity. What we know from the years we've been sourcing in there, that vineyard, that the Cabernet Franc ages beautifully. That this will, we've opened up verticals of this, and while it's delicious right out of the box, it will age beautifully, and it's got beautiful tannin structure and some acidity. There's almost a mouth-wateringness to it. Boy, that's we originally sourced this to be blended in with the Cabernet Sauvignon. But there's always a piece of that we keep separate and bottle it as single varietal. And we don't make very much of it. There's about 100 to 150 cases of it each vintage, depending on which barrels we choose. And those go directly out to our wine club members and people who visit us at the tasting room. So, and I always wish that there was more. It usually sells out really quickly, but we do just put a little bit aside just to be on its own. And the next wine, same thing, the Merlot. It grows right across the avenue from the Cabernet Franc, right in the heart of Cab Country. And it also stands on its own, and we originally did start sourcing that as a blender for Cabernet Sauvignon. But it stands so beautifully, and it says, hey, look at me, don't just blend me into the Cabernet, let's make a wine on its own. And so we did that. And we've been doing it for 7 or 8 vintages now, maybe 9 vintages we've been doing that. That is Merlot. That is a beautiful, concentrated, lush Merlot that's got all that nice fruit focus core. It's what people use it for blending. It's originally a Bordeaux varietal, and it is grown for the most part to be blended into Cabernet Franc, unless you're on the other side of the river, and then you have your Merlot, Cab Franc dominant wines. But boy, that does also stand on its own. It's 150 cases or so of that, and that also goes directly to our wine club. That is a beautiful food-friendly wine, and what I've learned from Jackson in our tasting room is that is a perfect wine to go with bacon. And so we did try that in Kari's kitchen, and he's right. He's absolutely right. That pairs beautifully with bacon. So the next wine that I've got, because I've got a red wine from Oakville Station, and then we've also got the Cabernet Sauvignon, and I'm going to do the red wine next. And so this is about 50% Merlot. There's about 30-35% Cabernet Sauvignon, and then the rest is the Cabernet Franc from the Oakville Station. So this is the red wine. We make about 400 cases. This goes out into distribution for us. This goes out into some of our key markets that you're able to find this in some retail, some restaurant lists. But this is really the best of all worlds. It's got the Merlot in it, it's got Cab Franc in it, it's got the Cabernet Sauvignon, all from the Oakville Station. And year after year, we get that fine-tuned. We know which barrels work with which wines. We know about what the percentage is going to be, although from vintage to vintage it does change. It isn't always the same percentages of each varietal, but it always gets a little bit of something. That is a lovely wine, and I put a steak on the grill. Some mushrooms would be really nice. A pasta sauce, maybe with some mushrooms in it, would be really, really beautiful. Nice marinara. Then the fourth wine, I'd like to taste them all in a row. It's amazing how different they are, but this is the Cabernet Sauvignon from Oakville Station. So this grows up on the block closest to the Tokelon Vineyard in Oakville. And this is almost 100% Cabernet Sauvignon. There's a tiny little bit of Merlot from the Oakville Station and a little bit of Cab Franc, but it's mostly Cabernet Sauvignon. It's nice to see how evolved these are and how close they are to being ready to bottle. Not just because the calendar says we have bottling space, and we're going to be on the bottling line, but it is the wine does say that it's ready. So that is really spectacular. I've got 3 more that I want to kind of get through real quick. We've got the Rutherford. This is a beautiful vineyard, Beckstoffer Vineyard up in the heart of Rutherford. We've been sourcing fruit from this vineyard for about 10 years. It's always been such a beautiful, beautiful wine. We don't actually put the vineyard name on the label. Just knowing that it's Rutherford is really enough for us. People talk about the Rutherford dust, but there's a red dustiness to it. But I don't always get that. Some people do, some people don't. This smells lush, it smells ripe, it's very fruit forward. That is the weight and the body of Rutherford. There's an herbal note to it, but there's chocolate and sort of a mocha, a little bit of vanilla that probably comes from the oak barrels. But there's this lush fruit core, and the weight of that is just amazing. And really, the Rutherford and the Oakville are not that far apart, a couple of miles apart, but they're worlds apart in flavor, and very, very distinct. The next wine that I have is Calistoga, and this one also just up valley. It's at the north end of the valley. It's where the valley starts to narrow between the two mountains. mountain ranges, and this comes from a vineyard that's actually up in the terrace foothills of the Palisades, up on the east side of the valley. And while Calistoga is the warmest appellation in Napa Valley, there's this little vineyard that's sort of up in a canyon, and it's not at high elevation, 400 or 500 feet elevation, but it stays cooler. It doesn't get as warm during the day, and it doesn't get as cool at night. And so it's really got this beautiful balance, and it's got this beautiful red black fruit that you would expect from Calistoga. And again, vastly different, 100% Cabernet Sauvignon. Oh, there's this red and black fruit in there. There's a licorice kind of a note and a little bit of cassis, but that is a full and lush. Like I would bottle that today. There's nothing else to do to that. That Calistoga is absolutely fantastic. The last one, this is one that I just love to make. This is our Benchlands, and we make the most of Benchlands of all the wines that we make. And why it is so much fun for me is really the directive is just to make the very best wine you can make. There's no limit to where the fruit has to come from, which barrels I can use, just make the best wine that I can. And this has fruit this year. This vintage has fruit in it from Rutherford, from that same vineyard, from Calistoga, Oakville. There's some Oakville fruit in here as well. And we have a couple of sources in Coombsville, which is on the south end of the valley, that we have been sourcing from. And there's a couple of family growers that are just doing a brilliant job growing fruit for us in the Coombsville area. And there's a lot of wineries down there now, and a lot of people growing, and it's starting to gain in popularity. We haven't done sub-AVA specific labeling for this yet, but we could. The fruit coming from that vineyard is that good. So for the most part, this is Coombsville along with the Rutherford, Oakville Station, and a little bit of Calistoga as well. And so it's a blend. It is Cabernet Sauvignon. There isn't anything else blended into this vintage. We could take a little Cabernet Franc, we could take a little Merlot, but we aren't this year. This is 100% Cabernet Sauvignon. And I like to leave it towards the end of the tasting because it's got all these pieces in it. It's got all these, the best of the best really of our valley floor vineyards. Some vintages, a little bit of Howell Mountain gets in there. The 2016 had some Howell Mountain in it. But this year, nope, it's all from the valley floor, and that is a lovely, lush, it's fresh, but there's also this sort of cocoa and mocha and a little coffee, tobacco sort of notes in it. It finishes strong with a nice fruit and dark cherry, and it just sort of lingers on the palate. This is like a burger wine for me. Like if you were putting a burger on the grill, if you were, you know, just that Saturday night, Tuesday night, Monday night, it doesn't matter. That's a really special bottle to open while still affordable. So the Benchlands for me is just, it's a winemaker's wine. It's wide open. There's no parameters. I don't have to follow any regulations on it for what goes into the blend, and it's just always so much fun. So I'm gonna thank you for joining us. I've had such a great time today, tasting through everything, getting ready to put these in the bottle so that you'll be able to enjoy them a year from now or so. We hang on to them for a little bit and let them hang out and get stored for a little bit in the cellar before we release them. So I appreciate that you joined us today. I loved being able to taste through these with you. Keep sending in your questions. We get great questions about the wines and about Kari's Kitchen. Next week, we won't be in Kari's Kitchen again. I'll actually be on the bottling line. We're bottling next Thursday, and so I'm probably going to be broadcasting from the bottling line, so you get a chance to see what happens when this actually does get into the bottle. So thank you for staying with us today, and I hope to see you again next week when we're on the bottling line. Cheers.